Hello and welcome to all. Apologies for the few minutes delay. As per usual, there are some technical difficulties that we had to smooth over, but we're ready to go and we're really thankful that you're here today. So just give us another moment or so and we'll get started right away. Thank you.
Okay, great. And I think we'll get started. We have people in the room, really excited to have you all here. And I see that there are still folks coming in, so maybe we'll keep adding, admitting people into the room, but we'll get started if that's okay. Great. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the 2023 UNECE Regional Forum side event, Gender Responsiveness in Partnership for the Goals, Goal 17. It is now quite well known and understood that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on gender equality and women's rights. The pandemic and the ensuing economic fallout has exposed and deepened long-standing economic, racial, and gender inequalities, hitting women and girls from marginalized groups the hardest, and this is really across countries. The data show that women globally suffered higher jobs and income losses, as well as increases in care workloads, worsening health outcomes, including with respect to mental health and access to family planning services, which in many countries were disrupted. And for many, lockdown measures place them at an even greater risk of violence. As we focus on building a more just, feminist, and sustainable post-COVID-19 world, we need to place the needs and voices of women and girls in all of their diversity at the center of response and recovery efforts. Central to this effort is stronger international cooperation, especially for financing gender equality. It's imperative that we do this to combat multiple interlinked global crises that put the lives and well-being of women and girls at risk. However, funding remains erratic and insufficient, given the scale of the problem of the challenges that women and girls face. To give you some examples, in 2021 rather, ODA amounted to 178 or 79 billion. That is equivalent to 0.3% of the combined gross national income of donor countries, so less than 1%. This share is actually much lower than in previous years. So we're actually seeing a trend downward, unfortunately, and well below, of course, the global target of 0.7%. Allocations to programs where gender equality is the main objective constitute just 4.6% of bilateral ODA in 2020. And so again, kind of another example of where the numbers really make it very clear that gender equality and financing for gender equality is not being prioritized. More funding, of course, goes to programs where gender equality is a secondary kind of objective, but again, really meager resources going to programs that are directly focused on gender equality. SDG 17, Partnership for the Goals, prompts us to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize global partnerships for sustainable development. This includes enhancing policy coherence, encouraging and promoting effective multi-stakeholder engagement, and of course, the focus of today, increasing the availability of quality data, as well as developing measures of progress. A cross-cutting theme among amongst these varied targets is gender responsiveness. This is a particular concern to the UNECE region, but of course relevant across regions, where we're seeing kind of, a backsliding of gender equality. According to the Gender Equality Index by the European Institute for Gender Equality, about which you'll hear more later from Irene, it will take more than 60 years to achieve gender equality in the EU at the current rate of progress. At today's event, so at the event that I'm so happy to welcome you all to, we will hear about the innovative tools and metrics, including indices, trackers, etc., which assess, based on the latest available data, where we are vis-a-vis gender equality and the extent to which policies have had a transformational impact or not on the lives of women and girls around the world. Particularly with the context of COVID-19, these sorts of diagnostic tools have been powerful instruments to raise awareness and drive policy change. Gender indices focus on ranking countries, are widely used to assess the current status quo, which countries are treading ahead in gender equality and which are falling behind as compared to their peers. And so those are the kinds of insights that you get from those tools. We'll hear about two of them today. The EIGE, Gender Equality Index, as I just mentioned, as well as the Gender Migration Index tool, which I'm excited to also hear about, from the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice. Both of them are important for communication and advocacy and for fostering real policy discussions. Indices, however, get us, some really good information at the aggregate level in terms of country level trends, but due to data gaps, don't necessarily drill down all the time at the subnational level. Outcomes of interest from marginalized groups, for example, which may be different from the national average, are largely invisible oftentimes. So for this reason, we'll also need to think about other tools and other trackers, dashboards, et cetera, to bring visibility to the reality for different subgroups in society. The SDG 5 tracker that UN Women will display today, for example, tells us a story of progress to date at that kind of aggregate level. Country, regional, and global data is used, but also calls attention to the what remains in terms of the unknown, the gaps in data, the enormity of the gaps in data, and the implications for policy discussion. Other tools that are not necessarily discussed today, but nonetheless important, are policy scorecards that are critical for placing the global outcome data into context. Why is progress not accelerated, for example? What policies exist and how can they be used to transform and turn the tide? Finally, we will also hear from the women's major group as they will share with us the advocacy methods, tools, and tips that have been utilized by the feminist and LGBTQI+ movements for transforming the current oppressive systems that widen gender inequality to ones that are more focused on solidarity, on collaboration, looking at movements and institutions that have been critical for accelerating progress towards achieving the 2030 agenda, feminist movements working in this area. So without further delay, and I think now we have many more folks have joined us. So again, welcome. We are really excited to introduce the first speaker. Antra Bhatt is our first speaker, and she's a statistics specialist in the research and data section at UN Women. Antra, you have the floor. If you want to try to share your screen, and if it doesn't work, then I'm going to open it on my side and share the screen for you. I don't know if you want to try in case it's now working for you.
Sorry, Ginette, it doesn't work on my side, looks like, so apologies, I'll have to.
Perfect. So then I'm going to share my share the slides. Give me one moment, folks. Okay, let me know if everyone can see this. And we're still admitting people to the room, so great. Okay, so I'm going to make it, there we go.
Okay.
That's perfect. So just let me know when you want me to go to the next slide.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you so much, Ginette, and hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. these days, with these virtual meetings, people join us from everywhere. So just saying a quick hello. Sorry, we had some technical issues. So I am looking at the presentation on my phone, but not on a big screen. So apologies if this is a little bit chaotic this morning, but thanks very much, Ginette, and glad to be here. Today, we'll be presenting some approaches and tools for better gender responsiveness in partnership across all of the SDGs. This is joint work with Ginette that I'm presenting today. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So for the first tool that I will be presenting today, it's an offshoot from our annual report that we produce. It's called the Progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, the Gender Snapshot. We started this tool in the 2021 edition. So you see the picture of the 2021 report on this slide for the first time. And the purpose of this tool was to really get started a dialogue on where we are on SDG 5 in this final decade for action. Let me also remind you that this report, Progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, is the only report in the UN system that really looks at all of the 17 goals from a gender perspective, looking at the interlinkages of each of the goals with SDG 5 and talking about mainstreaming gender across all of the SDGs. Next slide, please. So as we started this tracker in 2021, we continue to do this each year. So in the 2022 version of the Gender Snapshot, we have updated this tracker, and we would continue to do so for the years to come as we enter into this final decade for action. So without much delay, let's get into the tracker. Thank you. So here, let me see, what do these data reveal? So the visualization that you see in front of you, this was developed based on an assessment of the current level of progress on 9 targets and 18 indicators and sub-indicators under SDG 5. Each oval that you see on the slide here on the picture, it basically tells you an SDG 5 indicator value. So it's telling you that a blue means that the target is almost met or met. The green is close to target, and it's almost like a heat map that you see here. The warmer colors tell us how worse we are doing, and the brighter colors, the blues and the greens, they tell us that we're doing pretty good. So if you really look at this picture holistically, you see too few of the blues and greens and a lot of the warmer colors. You see a lot of red, yellow, orange, which means that unfortunately, the world is not really on track to achieve gender equality by 2030. So on the next slide, you will see that what we see is that the distance to equal is really long. Right now, we're seeing that 28% of the indicator values are actually either very far from target or they're actually far from target. And on the opposite spectrum, we see that only 13% are target met or almost met. So let's get a little bit further deep into which indicators these are on the next slide. So on this slide, you get a snapshot of where we are doing in terms of the different targets as in terms of a bar chart. But let me give you a few top line comments on this. So first of all, that we see in a few critical areas of women's empowerment, which is equality between women and men in time spent in unpaid care and domestic work, decision-making regarding sexual and reproductive health and rights, and also on provisions of systems to track funding on gender equality. We see that the world is far or very far from target. And there are only 2 indicators at the global level, one of which is women in local government, where we see that we are close to target. And in other areas, for example, eliminating discriminatory laws, ending harmful practices, progress has been moderate. And moderate is deeply insufficient if we really want to achieve the SDGs by 2030. We can also use this tool for looking at regional and country level snapshots. So in the next slide, you will see some of that, which might be quite useful since we're looking at one specific region here today, UNECE. So in this slide, we have the SDG regions, the Geographic Sustainable Development Goals region, and the UNECE region overlaps with the Central and Southern Asia and Europe and Northern America region. So if we put a spotlight on these 2 regions, as you can see on the marker that we're showing you on the slide, you can see that again, we see a lot of the warmer colors. So we don't see any country doing that great in terms of gender equality. And what also stands out to me is the grays. So you see a lot of missing data also in these two particular in these two particular regions, just like you see that in other regions of the world as well. I also want to highlight that as you can see from this visual, we have that 1 in every 15 countries is very far or far from target in at least a third of the SDG 5 indicators. So that also tells us a lot about the situation overall. And I think it's also important to see that if we want to zoom in a little bit further on this tool, what can we say about individual targets and indicators? So in the next slide, we'll have a look at one specific indicator. But before that, let's look at this one and focus really on the data gap. So what I want to highlight here is that gender data, we've made some improvements in the past years, but still a lot needs to be done. And I started this presentation with a visual where you saw all of the colors put together, but now really look at this like a curtain. So we're opening this up for you in terms of the curtain, and you see the amount of grays that are there on this slide, which really tell you that there is a huge data gap in terms of SDG 5. And on the slide, you can see that only 47% of the data needed to monitor SDG 5 are currently available. So with that, let's get into a specific zoom in on the target. I'll go through this relatively quickly because I'm also going to present the second tool, but let's zoom in on the one that is highlighted on the slide, which is unpaid care and domestic work. So as you see here, first thing we see is a lot of gray. So we don't have a lot of the data that's needed to monitor this particular target. And then also you see that really bright red and a lot of orange, a lot of yellow, and too few of the blues and the greens on the slide. So that really pictorially tells you how we are doing in terms of gender equality, especially in this particular target or indicator of SDG 5. So that's really the point of this tool, to not just focus on the numbers, but to also focus on what you can see pictorially, visually. And then if you want to get a deep dive, these data are widely available and on our website on data.unwomen.org, you can download them, look at them for your specific country, region, and so on and so forth. So I think on the next slide, we see that in terms of just what this means, that we don't have all of these data that are available. We also need to sort of pay attention to the fact that we need to accompany these data findings that you see with coherence with policy. So that's why we are here today. We're talking about the partnership between all the goals. So we really need to think about how stakeholders can come together to really make this partnership for achieving gender equality a success. And this tool, we think, has the potential to start the dialogue. Now I'm going to move on to the next tool. I will be going through very quickly on some of the slides because we have only budgeted about 10 to 12 minutes of time for this presentation. So here, I just want to give you a 1 minute snapshot on what this tool is about. So this tool is about looking at the outcomes of women and girls across the globe on one particular goal, which is goal 1 on poverty rates by sex and age. Until 2018, we didn't even have these data. So it was the World Bank collaboration that we did on 89 low and middle income countries that we started with the World Bank's GMD database, where we were able to, for the first time, disaggregate the data by sex and age for 89 countries. But these data really showed us the potential of multiple and simultaneous disaggregation. So as you can see here on this slide, we see that when you really disaggregate the data simultaneously by sex and age, you see a big gap that emerges in women of reproductive ages. So in the ages of 25 and 34, you see these huge gaps between men and women in terms of extreme poverty. So this was the first finding, but it was only for low and middle income countries. So we decided to work on this further and include other countries. So on the next slide, I want to show you the things that we did to update these data. Here we were able to still work with the World Bank, but just update these data, try to get into a little bit more detail in terms of what the drivers are, in terms of household composition and so on and so forth. But the interesting thing is that, as you will see on the next slide, that we were able to extend these data a little bit more for 186 countries and territories. And here we were able to include a lot of additional poverty lines as well, which in many cases, for example, for the UNECE region, when we talk about extreme poverty, it doesn't really mean anything. We don't really see big numbers. We see only low poverty rates at that level. But exactly, so on this slide, you can see that we have updated these data. And now we have these estimates available not just at the $90 level, which is the extreme poverty level, but we also have $320, $550, and also national poverty lines, which I think is really a great update of this tool, especially for the UNECE region, where a lot of countries are even using relative monetary poverty lines. And you can, again, download all these data from data.unwomen.org, look at your country of choice. But here on the slide, I just want to show you why it's important to do this, because as you can see from the projections that have come out from this tool, you see that women and girls overall are more likely to be in extreme poverty, and also at other thresholds as well. You will see the same trend than men and boys. That we see 383 million women and girls were living in poverty by the end of 2022 in comparison to about 370 million men and boys. So huge gaps in poverty at the global level, but at the country level, you can also see these gaps prevail. So on the next slide, I do want to show you a little bit about how we came about in doing some of this analysis. So all of this analysis is done in partnership with UNDP and the International Futures Model, which is hosted by the Pardee Center for International Futures at the University of Denver. I won't go too much into the details of this model, but I do want to show you pictorially through this slide how things are interconnected in this model. So you are able to sort of feed in some data that exist in terms of the national estimates that are available and get an output in terms of outcomes. So through this model, we are able to tell how women and girls are doing across the globe on extreme poverty, but also other poverty thresholds. And we're able to also forecast these data out up till 2030, which is the time by which we should achieve the SDGs. We know that with the pandemic, we have seen worsening of a lot of outcomes for women and girls, as Ginette mentioned in the beginning when she was speaking. So it's really important to have some of these tools. So in the next slide, I want to show you a little bit about the fact that this tool, in addition to telling you what the outcomes should be, can also tell you a little bit about some scenarios that you can create. So what if you introduce a certain package of policy transfers? What happens to the outcomes of women and girls in terms of poverty rates by sex and age? It's really powerful in terms of that as well. So on the next slide, I want to show you one of our scenarios. So for example, here you see that your base case would be a current path of development where you don't do anything. And then to that, you say that you're going to close the wage gap, you're going to give certain amount of welfare transfers, work progressively towards good family planning policies, also invest in female education. And then you could also do a combined package of policy interventions, which is what we also argue for. So on the next slide, you will be able to see that when we actually really do that, when we implement a combined set of policy intervention, that's when we see the maximum impact on poverty rates. So you can see here that the slide, that the line that goes all the way at the down is the one that is the combined effect of all of these policies that you implement together that can drastically reduce poverty rates by sex and age. I also want to show you on the next slide what we have done for the case of an SDG push scenario. So on the next slide, I want to show you how we have tried to bring together one fact is that we try to make a push to achieve the SDGs, but also try to factor in the fact that we have COVID now and COVID has set us back a lot. So implementing the things that you see here on the slide, which we will of course circulate later so you can engage with it in a lot of detail. But if we really implement all of these things together as part of the SDG push scenario, we can also see drastic improvement. And on the next slide, I'm going to show it to you for $550 poverty rates, which are quite applicable for many of the UNECE countries. And again, here you see that pictorially, just even not going into the numbers, you can see that in terms of the scenario that can have the most impact for women and girls, it's the SDG push scenario. So we really need to think about this approach where we look at the data, but we also implement and think about implementing a package of transfers, because we cannot do things piecemeal. There really needs to be a coherent strategy that helps in bringing down poverty rates for women and girls and make gender equality a real a promise that we can keep by 2030. I think on the next slide, I just have a quick wrap up. But let me just finish by saying that SDG 5 is not under review this year, but it really does not mean that we should not be paying attention to SDG 5. If anything, SDG 5 is closely linked with all of the SDGs. So we should think about always mainstreaming the SDG 5 across all of the SDGs, thinking about gender equality from the perspective of all of the goals like we do in the Gender Snapshot report. And I really hope that with these two tools that we have presented today, we'd be happy to share follow-up materials regarding these as well, that you are really able to take the dialogue forward in your region and specifically in your country. Thank you very much for your time today. And I look forward to engaging with you all in the discussion section. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antra. Really great presentation, lots and lots of information to kind of talk about in that presentation. I think one, the fact that we still chronically are underfunding gender data, leaving large gaps in our knowledge about what the reality is on the ground for many women and girls around countries around the world. Two, the need to really go big or go home in terms of financing for gender equality. These kind of siloed approaches are not going to cut it, right? The scale of the problem is so large that only a comprehensive package, right, that really targets these different areas kind of holistically and systematically are going to drive about the kind of change that we're looking for. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over now to our second speaker. We'll hear next from the European Institute for Gender Equality, Gender Equality Index. So we'll be talking about that from Dr. Irene. Irene works as a researcher at EIGE, where she conducts studies mainly on the development of the Gender Equality Index, and of course, the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action in the EU context. I'll be posting on the chat a bit more background on the various speakers, but I'll stop here and over to you, Irene. You have the floor.
Hello, good afternoon from Vilnius. I'm going to share the screen. 1 second. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Do you see it?
Yes, yeah. It's okay.
Okay, so thanks a lot for invited Ege to present the Gender Equality Index. This is a composite indicator that measures gender equality at the European Union level, so at a global level and also at individual level for all the EU member states. And the index is compounded by a certain set of domains. It has the domain of work that covers participation, segregation, and quality of work. We also have the domain of money that considers the subdomains of economic independence and financial resources. The domain of, it's not the domain of knowledge that covers attainment and segregation in education, the domain of time that considers care activities and social activities, so time spent on care activities and social activities, power that covers decision-making in several areas, like the political sphere, the social sphere, and the economic sphere. We have the domain of health that covers status and access and behavior. And these domains are called core domains, but we also have two more domains named satellite domains that are violence and intersecting inequalities. These two domains are satellites because of their nature. They have a specific nature. In the domain of violence, we don't want to reach the same level of violence for women and men. No? So what we want is to eradicate violence. And for intersecting inequalities, what we are doing is measuring gender equality for different population groups by type of household or by migration background, or considering other disaggregations, other population groups. So this is the conceptual framework of the Gender Equality Index. And as you can see, it has a hierarchical structure. As I said, is composed by 6 core domains plus 2 satellites. And the indicators covered in these 6 core domains are 31 indicators grouped in 14 subdomains. The sources that we have used are mainly 4 sources: Eurostat, Eurofound, EIGE, and FRA, the Fundamental Rights Agency. And for all these indicators, what we measure are gender gaps. So this is not an index for women. This is an index measuring the situation of women and men. So both disadvantages for women or for men are penalized exactly in the same way. And all the elements that we have in this hierarchical structure, the indicators, the subdomains, the domains, or even the overall index, all the elements have exactly the same interpretation. 1 means full inequality between women and men, and 100 means full equality. Here we have the list of indicators. We are not going to go through it, just to let you know that it covers classical indicators as duration of working life, or full-time equivalent employment rate, or graduates in tertiary education, share of women and men in the parliaments, life expectancy, and so on. So the index is a summary of all these key areas. Why we present or we compute a gender equality index instead of using a dashboard? Because as you know, an index is a synthetic indicator that grouped individual indicators in a single measure using a concept that is complex, no? A multidimensional concept. So we are combining very different things, but in a meaningful way. And in order to do that, we need a robust methodology. In the computation of the Gender Equality Index, we used the methodology provided by the Commission and by the OECD on composite indicators, but we provide also an added value because we consider what we call the multi-modeling approach. So we first computed many indices, and from all of them, we selected the most robust. So let me give like 2 words about this multi-modeling approach. For the computation of the composite indicators, one of the main criticisms is that they are a kind of black boxes that we don't know what is inside, and there is a high level of subjectivity in their computation because there are several steps, and the researchers are criticized by introducing subjectivity in all these steps. So there are many ways to compute an index. And what we did was to compute a set of potential indices, a set of potential formulas, and to select the best one. For instance, for different weighting methods, if we select, for instance, unitary weights, no? So in a way that we are giving the same importance to all the indicators. And we select one way of aggregation, for instance, the geometric mean. And we select a type of indicator. This is a formula. But if we change some of these options using expert weights instead of unitary weights, we have a different formula and a different index. So we computed more than 3,000 indices for a set of potential options, no? And from them, the best one is the gender equality index, the most robust index. The index that depends more on the raw data, on the indicators themselves, than on the decisions that we took as experts, no, on the decisions on the formula. This is the formula of the Gender Equality Index. And what it's important for me today is just to highlight once again that its interpretation is the one that I told you before. No, 1 means full inequality between women and men, and 100 full equality. Here we have the results of the last Gender Equality Index that we published in October last year. The general index for the EU27 was 68.6, and we see that here, this slide presents also the values, the scores for the domains. And we can see that the domain with the lowest score is power. So it's the one related to decision-making, participation in decision-making, followed by the domain of time. That is time spent on care activities and social activities. All these domains were stable if we compare the scores with the previous year, except the domain of knowledge that was worst. Here we have the distribution by countries, and we can see that there is a huge variability. Among the EU countries. Leading the ranking, we have the Nordic countries, and is Sweden, the country with the best score. And what can we see as well? That the evolution, no? the time evolution. With the white diamond, we have the first year available, that was 2010. So we see that there are countries with really an improvement in this decade, no? For instance, Malta or Italy, but there are other countries like Czech Republic or Poland that in fact didn't register progress, a real progress. We see also that the Nordic countries registered the best results, but they are not yet on 100, on the score 100. That is the one that we really want. We can be only satisfied when we reach gender equality that is established in 100. So all this white space that we see over the violet bars, this is the room for improvement. No, we still have a long way to go in order to reach gender equality in the EU. And I finish here my presentation. So considering these scores, we are progressing 1 point every 2 years, which means half a point a year. And this is a very low pace. As Ginette said, we will need 60 years to reach gender equality at this pace, and is something that we really cannot afford. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene. What a great presentation. One of the things that resonated for me was the analysis of the data across domains, and to see that power and time were some of the areas where we saw the largest inequalities between men and women, right? And I think, to me, that speaks to the inequalities we see within the home in terms of how time is distributed and resources. Of course, it's going to have impact, right, on the inequality that we see outside of the home in terms of women's ability to exercise the same voice, decision-making opportunities that we see for men. So really, really excellent. One of my favorite indices, I have to say, so really glad to see it presented here. Our next speaker, and just to say that there are some questions already on the chat. So there'll be an opportunity to answer those in the Q&A section, but feel free to start answering them as well if you'd like to, while we go through the other two remaining presentations, which I'm delighted to introduce. And so the next presenter is Dr. Lara, who is Assistant Professor of Political Science and Global Affairs and the co-director of the Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies program at the University of Portland. Lara, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ginette. Excuse me for the introduction. Just wanted to clarify that today the hat that I'm wearing is as the founder, executive director, and advocacy director at the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice, because the tool that I'll be presenting on is the Gender Migration Index, which we developed as part of the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice. So I will speak and I'll present on another progress measurement approach that may already give some insights to some of the questions that were raised about intersectionality, because that is one of the reasons as to why we developed the Gender Migration Index, to ensure that the intersection of migration and gender is indeed considered when we're looking at progress measurement. So we developed the Gender Migration Index, or GMI, to address gendered migration experiences which occur along a continuum of origin, transit, and destination countries. So based on a country's policies, gender dynamics might premise the reason for migration, but they might also affect experiences along migratory routes and in destination countries. And so along this continuum, women, girl, LGBTQIA+, and gender diverse migrants face heightened risks of marginalization, vulnerabilities, and violence. And yet at the same time, migrants remain largely left out of policy processes that affect their lives. And so to address this gap between lived experiences and policy, the GMI provides a guidance tool for stakeholders to ensure gender responsiveness and migrant inclusion in policy planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. So as part of today's session, I will provide a brief overview of how the GMI works, paying specific attention to our methodology, which is based on participatory action research and thus reflective of gender responsiveness and migrant inclusion in partnerships for goals, as well as our indicator system. And so I provide some case studies of the application of the GMI and conclude my presentation with an outlook for next steps in this regard. So what does the GMI do and how does it work? The GMI is a policy guidance tool that facilitates gender responsiveness and migrant inclusion in policy planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation by addressing the needs and challenges of women, girl, LGBTQIA+, and gender diverse migrants. And the index is based on an indicator system that centers migrants' lived experiences through participatory action research and is aligned with international review processes such as annual, periodic, and regular reviews, thereby strengthening multi-stakeholder engagement and providing criteria for benchmarking policy. And following principles of participatory action research, the GMI emphasizes participation and action by communities affected by the research and by policies, namely migrant communities and organizations working with migrant communities in efforts to democratize knowledge production at the intersection of migration and gender. And this methodology reflects the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice's vision of gender justice beyond borders and our mission of shrinking spaces between migrant communities and governing bodies. The methodology also presents and premises the indicator system that we developed to ensure gender responsiveness and migrant inclusion in policy, which builds on the IOM's migration governance indicators, as well as the UN minimum set of gender indicators. And so the indicator system follows a three-part structure with overall policy indicators speaking to the extent to which gender dynamics are mentioned, engaged with, and committed to, and the extent to which migration dynamics are mentioned, engaged with, and committed to. So content, engagement, commitment as indicators. And then the third set of indicators, namely the migration experiences indicators, speak to the extent to which migrants access resources, services, information, and accountability. So resources, services, information, and accountability as indicators. And all of the indicators are analyzed based on a traffic light framework that corresponds to limited, moderate, and extensive levels of gender responsiveness and migrant inclusion in policy. So who analyzes these indicators? The GMI, as mentioned, is premised on collaborative inquiry into gender responsiveness and migrant inclusion in policy with corresponding engagement in international review processes. And so as part of these efforts, the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice, so we, as a women, migrant, and youth-led organization, analyze the overall and policy indicators, so indicators 1 and 2, while stakeholders, so migrant communities and organizations working with migrant communities, analyze migration experience indicators, so indicators 3. In this way, the application of the GMI is thus co-curated in its methodology with a concrete research action trajectory that may result in civil society or shadow reports in the context of international review processes. And again, this is how we ensure gender responsiveness in partnerships for the goals. So to demonstrate this a bit further, allow me to briefly share findings from the case studies conducted so far based on voluntary national reviews on the Global Compact for Migration submitted for the first International Migration Review Forum last year in May. So in developing the Gender Migration Index, several sample case studies were conducted on voluntary national reviews for different countries based on the Global Compact for Migration across regions in order to offer comparative insights on gender responsiveness at the global level. And so these included Germany, Jordan, the Gambia, Mexico, and Turkey. Based on GMI indicators 1, so overall gender responsiveness can be identified as limited to moderate in all examined countries based on the voluntary national reviews. And so to show this even further, particularly how we engage with our partners, allow me to kind of zoom in on one example, namely Germany, and also since we're talking here within the regional forum on the UNECE region. So looking at Germany, where we conducted a full GMI analysis with a community-based organization in Stuttgart, Germany, that promotes equality and diversity in the labor market by addressing intersectional discrimination experienced by migrant women. So here's our full analysis of Germany, again, co-curated with our community partners. So again, the overall gender responsiveness analysis shows here moderate mention of engagement with and commitment to gender dynamics in migration. Generally, as part of our analysis, we provide brief notes for each of the indicators, as well as additional information to be considered for follow-up review. And this then informs our identification of a policy area of concern. So GMI indicators too. So in this case, labor policy emerged as a policy area of concern. And so relative to Germany, once the policy area of concern was identified, we conducted a policy-specific analysis of Germany's voluntary national review with a focus on labor, which revealed additional insights in terms of gender responsiveness in policy planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation as it pertains to migration. As demonstrated, we found that although Germany's overall mention of engagement with and commitment to gender responsiveness regarding migrants' lived experiences can be described as moderate, when it comes to the specific policy area of labor, gender responsiveness is largely limited with the exception of moderate commitment. And so this divergence really points to the importance of the three-part structure of the GMI, in which we conduct the overall and policy analysis, and then our partners in this case, WOW, conduct the migration experience analysis in order to present a comprehensive assessment that centers migrants' lived experiences and reflects the importance of partnerships for the goals when it comes to gender responsiveness. So again, our partner here, WOW, a local community-based nonprofit NGO focusing on labor market, the labor market and addressing intersectional discrimination experienced by migrant women, notably through programs such as their Job Ready program, Empowerment and Know Your Rights courses. And so it is premised on this work and expertise of WOW as a stakeholder that they then conducted the migration experience indicators analysis, speaking to the extent to which migrants access resources, services, information, and accountability. And then WOW also provided additional comments, practices, and recommendations for each of the indicators to be considered in policy planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation until the next review process. So as with the overall and policy analysis, a mixed report on gender responsiveness can be identified here, as according to WOW, migrant women moderately access resources and services, but only access information and accountability mechanisms in limited ways. And so this kind of full case study of Germany really demonstrates what we envision with the Gender Migration Index and its contributions in terms of gender responsiveness, as well as migrant inclusion in policy planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. And it speaks again to what SDG 17, Partnerships for the Goals, seeks to do. So just to give you a brief kind of overview of what this looked like. So here's literally a snapshot of the report and what it looks like. So again, emphasizing our methodology of participatory action research with detailed indicator analysis provided by our partners, and then along with that, practices, recommendations identified by the communities directly affected by the policies and practices here. So just allow me to conclude briefly by just summarizing again what the GMI seeks to do. And again, we just developed this as a new tool. So the GMI in many ways presents a replicable and sustainable framework to ensure gender responsiveness and migrant inclusion in policy. It strengthens the engagement of civil society. It builds multi-stakeholder capacity to effectively engage in international review processes. It promotes dialogue and information sharing among stakeholders. It establishes mechanisms for feedback and consultation, and it provides indicator criteria for benchmarking policy that can be used again over time. So speaking of over time and what's next, so just allow me to conclude here with how we see the GMI working. Again, the initial case study analysis was conducted on the Global Compact for Migration and the International Migration Review Forum. But because of the way that we structured the GMI, it can actually be applied in various international or across various international review processes, as you can see here, that all speak to the intersection of migration and gender. Indeed, when we conducted our initial analysis of the voluntary national reviews on the Global Compact for Migration, we intentionally aligned them with countries that have other upcoming international review processes coming up, such as the HLPF or CEDAW review. And speaking of Germany, the case study I focused on for today, Germany is up for CEDAW review in May, and then the EU is up for review at the HLPF in July. So again, our case study analysis of the GMI that we've already conducted on the Global Compact for Migration will greatly inform these additional review processes as well. And so with this, I say thank you. And I hope that the GMI offers a guidance tool that you may consider using in partnership with us in these various spaces. And I look forward to the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lara-Zuzan. Thank you. What a great presentation. And I think, what I'm seeing is the need for different sorts of tools and metrics, right? No one kind of index or tool can do it all. And I think this is a really great addition to that toolkit, or that set of tools that we need to properly inform policy from a gender perspective. I love this idea of having a feedback loop, right? Having a way to do this kind of assessment through the work that you've done, looking at the migration policy, looking at the migration experience, so kind of folding those two data insights together, and then through the process having a mechanism already built in for providing recommendations and providing suggestion for a way forward to address some of the gaps that have come to light from the analysis. So it's really quite interesting, the whole piece, how it all comes together. Our final speaker for the day is Valentina. Valentina is a professor at the Moldova State University, an international gender expert with over 19 years of experience working on gender analysis, gender mainstreaming, and women's political and socioeconomic empowerment. Valentina, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Ginette. Thank you, colleagues. Greetings from Moldova. And I am so happy that we have many participants from different countries. It's very important for all of us, these discussions. But I would like to highlight only very important issues in order to offer more space to my colleague for questions and answers. Women's Measure Group is a global network, and several years with large experience on advocacy of women's human rights. But today I would like to mention one of the most important tools. All tools are as important, but to share our experience on nursing feminist advocacy for transformative change. To ensure that our members stay up to date on their advocacy skills, even during the COVID-19 pandemic, which has forced all of us to change the way we do advocacy, Women's Measure Group organized 5 monthly meetings and skill building. Called Nursing Feminist Advocacy, these sessions included expert members from Women's Measure Group engaging in peer learning process with interested members. The topic covered included language advocacy, building key message and alliance, bilateral advocacy, member state and UN institutions, traditional media, digital media. It's very important, all issues, all topics. But I would like to mention some very important moments. Why do we need language advocacy? Very often people don't understand this. Language is not just semantics. Language has a political power and the ability to help or harm. What type of language we use? Gender blind, gender neutral, gender sensitive, gender transformative. Our language is our power. And all our women's NGO should use gender transformative language. Also, it's very important, as lessons learned during our session was how to combine several traditional media tools and digital media. Because we are different. We represent different regions. We represent different countries with different status of women and with different competences and opportunity. I don't like to discuss more about our very important session. All records are available on Women's Measure Group YouTube channel. But it's very important to mention that Women's Measure Group supports the advocacy of its member toward a gender equal and just work at the UN Sustainable Development process. and I would like to encourage our participant to be a member of Women's Major Group. But at the same time, I would like to mention our key messages. In today's context of interconnected crisis, which disproportional effect of women and girls, gender equality must be central to all response efforts. Women are vital agents of changes. Their full, equal, and meaningful participation and leadership at all levels are critical for sustainable development. And investment need to be channeled effectively to react and to support grassroots women's organizations. It's very important now to working at local level and to support our women's group, a local women's organization. Also, we demand that governments match the political determination and persistence that feminist and allied social movement demonstrate every day. We are working every day, very hard, but dedicated to gender equality issues and women's empowerment. Efficient partnership will be only possible with the meaningful engagement of an independent, fully funded and proactive civil society, including women's NGOs. Effective and a functional partnership must be based on interconnection of all SDG and based on gender mainstreaming in all SDG and data collection based on intersectionality. Thank you very much for the questions in the chat. It's very important to encourage and promote effective public-private, and civil society and women's NGO partnership, building on the experience and resourcing strategy of partnership. At the end, I would like to specify that today we are in a new context. Due to the war in Ukraine, we need to rethinking and to adapt, adjust our advocacy strategy. At the beginning, Antra mentioned the distance to equality is long. And we should work together. We have a lot of hard work, but only together in partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Valentina. What powerful words, echoing some of the sentiments of the other speakers in terms of really the importance and the power of partnerships. And I think your important addition is something that I think deserves to be echoed. This has to include grassroots women's organizations who oftentimes are, again, chronically underfunded, not in the spaces that they need to be to inform decision-making and policy discourse. I also really welcome your intervention around language and the importance of language. I think that there's a lot that we can be doing, dare say, at the UN to really take those recommendations from your interventions on board. A lot more that needs to happen there. And then, of course, the really great point that's coming from your presentation, but also from the Q&A around intersectionality and the need to really be thinking about the issues with the data that we have and the invisibility of many groups and subgroups of women and girls because of the data and the limitations of the data that we currently have. Please join me in thanking everyone today, all of our presenters. Really fantastic interventions from all. I next want to turn to the Q&A portion of the agenda. I want to see if I have any questions or anyone who has already raised their hand. So let's see how we do that here. And maybe to the organizers, are folks able to raise their hand and ask questions?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I do see there's a hand raised, but I can't, oh, now I can see, okay. I can see now who that is. And so the first question comes from Nurgal. You have the floor, and sorry if I mispronounced your name.
Yes, thank you very much. I am from Kyrgyzstan, Forum of Women's NGOs of Kyrgyzstan. And I have some comments and related to the first presentation and to Antra. I think this is great what you are doing, and it is great that in these women's discussions you are raising the global partnership issues, because the global partnership issues actually are moving very effectively but losing a little bit strong women's voice. And I want to announce and to call your attention to participate in the GPDC Global Partnership for Development Effectiveness. In the coming 3 years, there will be waves monitoring of the global partnership. And one of the indicators is indicator 8, which is similar indicator 5C1 on tracking budget allocation. When we talk about political will, this is great. We're talking about numbers, this is great, but we need advocacy, we need financing, and this indicator is actually missed out. And I also applaud what Valentina told, cooperate, especially UN, please cooperate with women's groups, because the previous monitoring was not very, it was great, but I think there should be more done in, regarding the partnership with women's groups on the ground. UN Women was monitoring of indicator 8. Has any one of you read the data? Almost only 19% of countries who participated, it's 85 countries, I think, were actually meeting the requirements for tracking budget allocation. Only 19%. That is a drastic figure. And this is what Ginette and someone of you were telling about how far we are. And partnership is extremely important, but the GPDC will be doing monitoring alongside with other agencies in GPDC, OECD, on partnership, global partnership. And it was women's advocacy who managed to include there this indicator, so that development effectiveness is not good if gender is not addressed. So it is there, but women's groups should be more participating. So I'm calling your attention because here you collected a lot of people who are very interested in data. This data should be advocate for participation, getting on time the information, and also bring please to country dialogues. There will be global partnership and there will be multi-stakeholder partnership in our countries, practically in many of our countries in the coming 3 years. Country dialogues may miss information on gender indicator, on 5C1 indicator, in GPDC indicator 8, if we don't bring that information, if we don't cooperate with the young women. So this is a short note. And I also back up what Valentina was telling about local women's groups. This is one of the ways to ask, request, engage local women's group to collect the data. Partnership is strong when you provide, capacitate, and provide space for organization to speak with the data, to collect the data. And this citizens' data is extremely important. Where does it come? It comes from women's groups. Thank you so much. Sorry for taking your time.
Thank you so much. What a great intervention. I want to see if folks want to respond, have any comments related to this intervention. And if I may, I'd also like to highlight that there's another question on the chat about the definition for what we mean by gender transformative language. And so maybe that can also be added to your thoughts as you reflect on this question, comments from Nurgal. And maybe I'll start with Antra, the question on 5C1 and the commentary on that.
Yes, thank you very much, Ginette. Yeah, really great intervention from colleagues here. So I think that for 5C1, again, the presentation was really short, so we didn't have a chance to delve too much into detail into any of the indicators, but I'll drop the link in the chat. In this year's report, also we have the updated data. Annually, we're updating this data on SDG 5. And you will see that I'm actually looking at my screen right now with the report. And for 5C1, all of the regions are bright red, so very far from target, except for Central and Southern Asia, which is moderate distance from target. So again, it just sort of goes in line with the intervention that was just made. So completely agree that these data are the starting point for discussions, and even in the GPDC meetings, the tracker could be used to say that looking at the data that has been reported in terms of from the SDG indicator database, we see that there isn't enough being done in terms of countries with systems to track gender equality. And like we've mentioned, it's very important to try to fill these data gaps, because if we don't even know what's happening, we won't even know what the outcomes are. We don't have a starting point. So the point of this tool is really to just start the conversation with whatever data we have available, and cannot agree more that tracking funding, which is also links very well with SDG 17, which is the partnership for all of the goals, is really important. Finally, I also think that citizen-generated data is also important. It has its own challenges, of course, but we need to start the conversation. There have been some efforts in that direction also, but again, it's this kind of data also that we need to explore a little bit more. I think that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Antra. I do see that Valentina has already answered the question that was on the chat. And we have another question, another raised hand. So if I may, I'll turn over to Varka for her question.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm from the Collaborative Network to End Exploitation in Canada. My question was, I put my question in the chat around intersectionalities. And I love the two tools that Antra and Irene presented. Going back to the comment that Nurgul said around grassroots organizations collecting data, I agree to collect data, but we need disaggregated data that intersectionality is reflected in this data. Otherwise, the SDG aim of nobody left behind, no one left behind, is meaningless. Because we all know that, I'm giving example with Canada. In Canada, talking about the pay equality gap. So the pay equality gap between white women and white men is around 80 cents of a dollar. And then when you go and disaggregate that around race and immigration status or indigeneity, indigenous women are receiving 58 cents on the $1 that white man receives, makes. And we are talking about the same education level. We're talking about the same, the same sphere of employment and so on. So if we are talking about data and we want to use those tools, we have to give segregated data. Otherwise, I question myself the usefulness of those tools. Yeah, because also Canada will be up for voluntary review this June on the implementation of the SDGs, and we are working on a parallel report on Canada advancement on the SDGs, and this type of data is crucial. But if it's not intersectional, I don't see how we can use it in a meaningful way to advocate for policy change. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Varka. I'm going to open this to everyone, to all of the panelists. What are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest opportunities when it comes to using intersectional data to inform policy and policy discourse? And so if you can all reflect on that. And let me see if anybody wants to go ahead and go first. Do any of the panelists want to take this question on and start? And ideally, everyone can reflect on this. Over to you, Irene.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I agree on the importance of intersectional analysis is fundamental. And I take it every time that is possible, we include it in our analysis and our reports and so on. The main challenge, as always, is data availability. So we have to work with harmonized data for the EU 27 member states, and And there are many disaggregations that are not covered by the data availability, by the data available. So what we do precisely in the index is, as I mentioned, there is a domain on intersectionalities, and we cover different subpopulation groups according to the different type of households, the migrant background, the different age intervals and different education levels. Also, we could run analysis at the rural-urban disaggregations, but yeah, we are constantly fighting for improving the data. It's a hard work that we all have to do. Yeah, I hope I replied a bit to your concerns and your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. Antra, do you want to jump in from UN Women's side?
Sure, yes. So from my side, I dropped a link in the chat, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. So at UN Women, we are also trying to make use of diverse tools. As we mentioned, the couple of tools that you heard about today is where we have a wide range of data from all across the world, and we're able to tell you a lot more about some global and regional numbers. But we also work a lot towards intersectionality. So there is always a 2-page spread in the Gender Snapshot report that we publish each year, which talks about intersectionality. For example, in the 2021 edition, we focused on, for example, young women who are not in education or employment by disability status, which is an important intersectional lens as well. And similarly, in every report, we always try to come up with, a focus on leave no one behind, and to the extent possible, because like Irene mentioned, the issue is working with a harmonized data set that has data available across countries. I also want to mention that we had a report called Turning Promises into Action, which is really focused on intersectionality. So please look at that report, where you will see that we have done a detailed deep dive onto some of these issues using a case study approach. We really look at the intersection of where you live, along with which kind of income level your home belongs to, as well as a lot of other work on race, ethnicity, and so many things as applicable to the context of the country. So I agree that these things are important, but it's the data gaps and the fact that we do not have harmonized data on so many important factors across the globe that prevents us from doing or presenting a global picture.
Thank you so much, Antra. One of the things that's so powerful about taking the data that is available, even if it's limited, and using it to bring forward the intersectional perspective, is that you often find that the average, the national average, let's say you're looking at girls' education, tells you one story in terms of the trend and the trajectory. When you then analyze it by indigenous status, by race, ethnicity, location, income, you then find that oftentimes the most marginalized in society have a very different trajectory, where the national average is telling you that there has been progress. The disaggregated data often tells you that for those groups and subgroups of women and girls, the progress is actually not there and maybe going in the wrong direction, in the opposite direction. So really powerful. Valentina, I see that your hand is raised as well. Did you want to also add?
Very, very quickly. Thank you, Ginette. We have an excellent discussion. One suggestion or one reflection. We can discuss a lot about data. In some countries, where a lack of data, it's a lack of problems. For some governance, it's very easy to told we don't have data. In this context, we don't have any problems. Specifically focus on women's needs, on gender-specific needs. In this case, data are advocacy tool. What we would like to propose? What we can do? First of all, I would like to address our donors, the issues, to offer more funds for women's NGO. Women's NGO in all our country have a good capacity, who have a good knowledge, and in cooperation with academic sector, can collect and use and offer interpretation to several data, disaggregated by sex, age, disability, rural-urban, and other indicators. Also, I would like to stress attention, Irene, the situation in EU country, non-EU country, it's totally different. And we should take these questions into consideration and help more our NGO, women's NGO, at local, national level from non-EU country too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valentina. Great reflections to this really important discussion that we're having. I think we're almost out of time. I don't see further hands raised. And so maybe a question to the panelists has to do with all of these great tools, all of these great resources that have been presented today. How are you working to bring them out into the world, right? So that they're used, right? It's important to have these tools, but it's more important that these tools are then used in a very concrete way by policymakers and by other stakeholders. So the question to the panelists has to do with socializing these tools and making sure that they don't, sit in a folder somewhere or in our, bookcases, but actually are being used to bring about the transformational change that we all want to see. And maybe I'll start with Lara-Zuzan for that question. Lara-Zuzan.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if I just may briefly speak also to the question on intersectionality, I'll combine both, since that's pretty much why we developed the Gender Migration Index, to close this gap in terms of looking at gender at the intersection of other considerations. And so, and some challenges that we see here is that, of course, these intersections then can be further, there's further sub-intersections, right? So we're saying the Gender Migration Index. Now, both within gender dimensions and within migration dimensions, we have a lot of further sub-intersectional considerations, right? So for instance, with migration, what kind of migration status are we talking about, right? There's a difference in terms of access to resources and services and accountability mechanisms and information, whether we're talking about asylum seekers and refugees, whether we're talking about labor migrants, right? So that even when we make this attempt for intersectionality, there's always further considerations also to keep in mind. So just wanted to point out that we really have to pay attention to the detail if we want to further evidence-based policy, right, that really specifically targets and speaks to the challenges and needs of migrants in our case, right, because these intersectional experiences are very complex. So that's an important contribution here also to make. And then in terms of, so how do we create this gender responsiveness in partnerships for the goals? So for us, again, speaking on the Gender Migration Index, we launched this intentionally around the International Migration Review Forum, which is set to happen every 4 years, right? So we're actually starting at the baseline. This is the first time that there are voluntary national reviews submitted on the Global Compact for Migration. So we're using this opportunity to do the analyses in terms of the overall and the policy, and within these 4 years, build partnerships with migrant communities and organizations working with migrant communities, that by the next forum, we will be able to present a full GMI analysis as we did in the kind of exemplary way that I presented on with Germany. So we have this broad plan of and looking at, okay, when is the next international review process and what needs to happen in between this time. So that's how we're kind of conceptualizing it. And again, applying it also to other international review processes is, of course, also next on our agenda. So timing, planning, reaching out, and keeping in mind when these civil society reports, when these advocacy spaces are there, and being prepared for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lara-Zuzan. A whole other job in and of itself. Over to Irene, if you want to jump in on this question as well.
Well, in our case, the computation of the Gender Equality Index was a very long process. It took more than 3 years, and we were in touch with the different stakeholders, the different national statistical institutes, with other agencies, Eurostat. So it was really a consultation process, both for the conceptual framework, so for defining which are the key areas to measure gender equality, and then for the data as well, trying to collect the best indicators in order to populate those areas of concern. And in the coming years, we will have a review of the index, because the first edition was launched in 2013. So it's time to review the new key policy areas, the new data available, and we consider the index as an alive tool. So if it's possible to improve it, we will try to do it for sure, but always with stakeholders and in a consultation process for sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene. It's so important, the consultation piece of this. Maybe Antra and Valentina, maybe a few short reflections. I think we're almost out of time. Valentina, maybe you want to go first. I see your hand raised.
Yes, a few words. I think it's very important to encourage and educate other stakeholders as partners. Many people, many organizations, and sometimes governments don't understand what is partnership. What is partnership with women's NGOs? And in this case, we'll have more men. We demand for strong partnership. Women's Measure Group demand for global solidarity and partnership with all stakeholders. But it's very important to take into consideration and have a strong position on women's empowerment and gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you, so great. Antra, maybe over to you.
Sure, it's difficult to say anything more because I think a lot has been said, but I'll come back to being a data geek. I think it's important to also think about how we can create better data. And in terms of that, I think it's important to mention the program that UN Women has on making every woman and girl count, which is now in its phase 2. And through that program, we are also trying to work with governments to fill some of the data gaps, for example, in violence against women or time use. And it's probably also worth mentioning that during the time of the pandemic, when we didn't have data at all on how women and girls are doing, the Women Count program was able to also put out some rapid gender assessments. So we could also think a little bit about and understand more on what's happening on the ground. And some of those surveys actually led to some amount of policy change in countries in terms of helping women to sort of cope with the pandemic. I also want to mention that from our side, we have been working with our country offices, especially the Asia Pacific region, to socialize some of the tools that we presented today, where we are trying to work with the International Futures Model with a few countries in the Asia Pacific region to really look at what these data tell us at the country level and how stakeholders can actually use them in national reviews and so on. So I think those are some closing comments from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Please join me, everyone, in a big virtual applause to all of our amazing presenters. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I think hopefully you all will agree the discussion was fascinating and enriching. Lots of, focus on partnership, meaningful, substantive partnership, including with women's rights organizations on the ground. Lots of planning and outreach that makes sure that everyone is part of the process of developing these very important diagnostics tools. And finally, making sure that we're doing this through an intersectional lens and that we're not forgetting that women are not a monolith, right? And we need to make sure that we're capturing their experience in all of their diversity. I'll stop there. Thank you all. Thank you very much for a great event, also to the organizers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.